Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. The Tuesday morning sunlight slipped softly through the kitchen blinds while Tony Glass poured coffee into his daughter's favorite mug, the one printed with little cartoon elephants. Emma sat at the breakfast table, slowly moving scrambled eggs around her plate. Her small 7-year-old face looked tight with worry, and she had not eaten a single bite. That alone was strange. Emma normally loved breakfast more than anything. "Dad," her quiet voice broke the calm kitchen sounds. Tony turned from the counter. "Yeah, baby? Do you really have to go to Boston?" It was already the third time she had asked since last night. Tony had a documentary film conference in Pittsburgh that required travel and meetings. 3 days filled with networking, meeting possible clients, and discussing funding for his next project about city rebuilding in old industrial towns. He had worked as an independent documentary filmmaker for 12 years, slowly building a strong name for honest storytelling that exposed uncomfortable realities. Still, Emma's face made him pause longer than usual. "It's only 3 days, sweetheart. You'll stay with Mom and Grandma Agnes. You like being with them, right?" But something changed in Emma's expression. A small flash of fear crossed her eyes. Real fear. Tony set down his coffee and moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. "What's wrong?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. She looked toward the hallway as if checking whether someone was listening. Then she leaned in very close and whispered, "When you leave, Grandma Agnes takes me somewhere. She tells me not to tell you or Mommy. She says it's our secret." Tony felt a cold shock run through him. His work had taken him into dark places for years. He had exposed corruption, abuse, and hidden crimes through his documentaries. He had learned to recognize when something was deeply wrong. And right now, every instinct inside him screamed danger. "Where does she take you?" he asked carefully, keeping his voice calm, even though his heart was beating faster. "I don't know the name," Emma whispered. "It's a big house with a blue door. Sometimes there are other kids there, and grown-ups. They make us do things." Tony's body went cold. "What kind of things?" he asked gently. Emma's lips shook. "They take pictures. They make us wear different clothes and smile. And..." Her voice broke and she started crying. Tony pulled her into his arms immediately, his mind spinning. His wife Helen was already at work at her law office downtown. Agnes Taylor, Helen's mother, had been staying in their guest house for the past 6 months after her husband passed away. It had seemed like a safe family arrangement at the time. Help with Emma, support while both parents worked long hours. Now it felt completely different. "Listen to me," Tony said softly, holding Emma's face so she would look at him. "You did the right thing telling me. You are very brave." Emma cried harder. "Grandma said if I tell, something bad will happen to you and Mom." "Nothing bad will happen," Tony said firmly. "I promise you that." Tony had spent years investigating dangerous people. He had interviewed survivors, worked with police, and helped expose hidden networks of exploitation. He understood how silence and threats were used to control victims, and now it was in his own home. He turned away for a moment, trying to steady himself, then quickly texted his conference contact saying there was a family emergency. After that, he called Helen. "Tony, what is it?" Her voice was instantly worried. "I need you home right now," he said. "It's about Emma." "Is she sick? What happened?" "Just come home, and don't tell your mother." There was a pause. "My mother. Please, Helen, just trust me." Within 30 minutes, Helen Glass rushed through the front door. Her confident lawyer attitude broke the moment she saw Tony's face. Something serious was clearly wrong. They moved into his office while Emma sat in the living room watching cartoons. The door closed. Tony told Helen everything word by word. He watched her expression change from confusion to shock and then to fear. "That can't be," Helen whispered. "My mother would never. She loves Emma. She has been alone with her a lot," Tony said quietly, "especially when we're busy." Helen looked shaken, trying to hold on to logic. "We need proof. A child's statement alone won't be enough. They will say it's imagination." Tony nodded. "I know." He opened his laptop and showed her Emma's therapy drawings from school counseling sessions. Strange images that had once seemed like stress art now looked disturbing. A blue door, figures standing together, something that looked like a camera. "I recorded everything she told me," Tony said, showing his phone. "We go to the police after we confirm more." Helen swallowed hard. "This is going to destroy everything if it's wrong." "If it's wrong, I'll live with that," Tony said. "But if it's true, we cannot ignore it." Helen exhaled shakily. "I'm supposed to fly out tomorrow morning." "You still will," Tony said. "We don't change anything. That's how we catch this." Helen hesitated. "And what exactly are you planning?" "I follow them," he said simply. "I document everything." The room fell silent. Finally, Helen spoke again, quieter now. "If you are right, then we protect her, no matter what." That night, Tony prepared carefully. He packed his travel bag as if he were still going to Boston. Helen kept her normal routine. Nothing in the house changed on the surface. Emma stayed close to Tony the entire evening. "Are you really leaving?" she asked again before bed. Tony kissed her forehead. "No matter what happens, I am not going anywhere you can't be safe." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded and held on to him tightly. After she fell asleep, Tony gathered his equipment, 2 small hidden cameras, a long-distance microphone, a tracking phone, and a recorder. Everything he had used in past investigations now turned toward his own home. Helen stood in the doorway watching him. "What if my mother realizes something?" "Then we lose her," Tony said. "That's why we cannot alert her." Morning came with a strange calm. At 6:30 a.m., Tony placed his suitcase in the car while Agnes waved from the guest house window. Emma gave him a small, nervous look from the kitchen. Helen played her role perfectly, kissing him goodbye like everything was normal. "I'll miss you," she said loudly enough for Agnes to hear. 3 days, Tony replied. "I'll call tonight." He left in Helen's car, acting like he was heading to the airport. Once out of sight, he changed plans, heading instead toward a hidden surveillance point he had already chosen. By 8:47 a.m., Tony was positioned behind thick bushes 3 houses away from his home. His cameras were ready. His view covered the driveway and guest house clearly. At 8:55, Agnes came out of the guest house wearing a light cardigan and carrying her purse. She walked calmly into the main house using her key. 5 minutes later, she returned with Emma. Tony's stomach tightened. Emma wore a yellow dress he had never seen before. Agnes helped her into the back seat of a silver car, speaking softly as if nothing was unusual. Tony started recording immediately. The car pulled out. Tony followed on a borrowed motorcycle, keeping distance, staying hidden among normal traffic. They drove through quiet suburbs before heading toward the older industrial side of the city, a place Tony recognized from a documentary he once filmed about abandoned buildings and forgotten neighborhoods. Agnes turned onto a street lined with old warehouses. She stopped in front of a converted building with a faded exterior. Tony parked far away and moved carefully on foot, keeping himself hidden. Through his camera lens, he saw Agnes holding Emma's hand and walking toward a side entrance. A blue door. Tony's breath slowed. Everything Emma had said was true so far. Agnes unlocked the door and led Emma inside. Tony stayed still behind a fence, continuing to record, watching the door close. He checked the time. 9:23 a.m. He could not rush in yet, not until he knew who else was involved. He stayed focused, watching, waiting, and recording every detail, knowing this was only the beginning. They all knew he would never hide again. De Leon's jaw stayed tight as he spoke, his voice controlled but sharp. "You've turned yourself into a vigilante," he said. Tony didn't look away. "I've turned myself into a witness. Everything in that documentary was real." "It was revengeful," De Leon replied. "It was not fair." "It was necessary," Tony answered calmly. Tony held his gaze without blinking. "You built a network that harmed children for profit. You used people around you. You even involved my wife's mother to hand my daughter over to that system. You did this for years, hiding behind companies, contracts, and respectability. Someone had to make sure the truth came out clearly." De Leon leaned forward slightly. "And what about second chances? What about change? You've destroyed my life so completely that even after I serve my time, I will never live normally again." "Good," Tony said without hesitation. De Leon's face changed, anger breaking through the control he tried to keep. Real anger, raw and unfiltered. "You think you are some kind of hero?" he snapped. "You are just a man who got lucky. You were in the right place at the right time when it came to your daughter. That does not make you special." Tony answered quietly. "I don't need to be special. I just needed to be a father who protected his child and made sure the people who hurt her cannot hurt anyone else again." They stayed facing each other through the thick glass barrier. After a long silence, De Leon asked, "Why did you come here? To enjoy this moment?" Tony shook his head slightly. "No, I came to make sure you understand something." He leaned in a little. "I still have more recordings, more proof, more connections that are fully documented. If you ever come near children again after you are released, if I even hear your name linked to anything suspicious at all, I will release everything. And what I have will make that documentary you saw look mild." De Leon's eyes narrowed. "That is a threat." Tony's voice stayed steady. "It's a promise." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. De Leon called after him, "What about forgiveness?" Tony looked back once. "Ask the children you harmed," he said. "If they forgive you, then I will think about it." Then he walked out without looking back. The sentencing for Agnes Taylor happened in March. The courtroom was full, every seat taken. Emma's case had become the center of a much larger investigation, and the attention from media and public was heavy. The judge was a woman in her 60s. Her face was serious, controlled, and fair in a strict way. She listened carefully to every victim's statement. Emma was too young to speak in court, but both Tony and Helen gave statements on her behalf. Then the judge addressed Agnes directly. "Miss Taylor," she said, her voice firm, "you had a sacred responsibility. As a grandmother, you were expected to protect your grandchild, to care for her, to keep her safe. Instead, you delivered her into the hands of those who caused harm." The judge paused, letting the words settle. "You did not only betray her, you betrayed every idea of family, trust, and basic human duty. The court finds no reason to reduce your responsibility. There is no sign of true regret, no understanding of the damage you caused. Agnes sat still, staring forward. Her face showed nothing. I hereby sentence you to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will be taken into custody immediately. The bailiff moved in and guided her up. As she was led away, Agnes turned her head one last time. Her eyes met Tony and Helen's briefly. There was no emotion left in her expression. No anger, no defense, nothing. Just emptiness. Everything had drained out of her. She looked like someone facing a long life behind locked doors, with no way back. Outside the courthouse, Emma was waiting with Helen's sister. When she saw Tony and Helen, she ran straight into them. "Is it over, Daddy?" she asked quietly. Tony knelt down so he was at her level. He looked at her carefully. She had been through more than any child should, but she was healing slowly. Her therapist had said she was making real progress. The nightmares were becoming less frequent. She was smiling again, even if only sometimes. "Yes, baby," Tony said softly. "It's over. The people who hurt others are going away for a very long time. All of them." It wasn't completely true in the strictest sense. There were still smaller parts of the network, and some people were still facing trials in other places. But the main structure, the core of it, had been destroyed. Agnes Taylor, Kenneth Booth, Patricia Dyer, Clayton Delio, all of them were either in prison or on their way there. The children who survived were now in therapy, getting care, support, and safety. The system that had operated quietly for years had finally been exposed and broken apart. That night, Tony sat alone in his office for what he knew would be the last time. The walls were still covered with papers, notes, connections, timelines, and printed photos, evidence of everything he had built. Tomorrow, he would take it all down, file by file, wall by wall. The investigation was finished. The case was closed. He leaned back in his chair and thought about who he had been a year ago. Back then, he was just a documentary filmmaker who watched stories from a safe distance. He believed that simply showing the truth was enough to create change. Now, he understood something different. Sometimes truth alone was not enough. Sometimes change needed action. Sometimes it required stepping into danger, taking risks, and getting personally involved. He had crossed lines he never thought he would cross. He had watched people without full permission. He had confronted dangerous individuals face to face. He had created something that didn't just inform people, but destroyed reputations and exposed hidden systems. Was he completely comfortable with all of it? Not entirely, but if it meant protecting Emma, he would do it again without thinking twice. Helen appeared in the doorway quietly. "You're coming to bed?" she asked. "Soon," Tony replied. She walked over and looked at the walls covered in evidence. "You know what I think?" she said. "What?" Tony asked. "I think you stopped being only a documentary filmmaker this year. You became something else." Tony looked at her. "Something else like what?" "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "But it's someone who doesn't just record injustice anymore. Someone who steps in and acts." Tony stayed silent for a moment, thinking. "Is that a good thing for Emma?" he asked. "Yes," Helen said immediately. "And for me?" he added. Helen gave a small, thoughtful smile. "I don't think you know yet." They stood there together for a while without speaking. Then Helen spoke again. "Ruby Crawford called today. She wants another project, a new case. She asked if you would be involved." Tony raised his eyes slightly. "What kind of case?" "A corporate whistleblower," she said. "He is being threatened by his former employer. Harassment, intimidation, even death threats." Tony felt that familiar feeling return inside him, that same drive that had pushed him forward before. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "I told her you would think about it." He nodded slowly. "And what do you think I should do?" Helen looked at him for a moment. "I think you will do what you believe is right, no matter what I say. That is who you are now." He didn't argue, because she was right. Something inside him had changed permanently. He could no longer ignore injustice when it came close. He could not trust that systems would always fix things in time. He could not remain only an observer. "I'll call Ruby tomorrow," he said finally. Later that night, he went upstairs to Emma's room. She was asleep, peaceful, her small body curled slightly under the blanket. Her stuffed elephant was still tucked safely under her arm. Tony stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her breathe. Quiet, steady, safe. He felt that same deep protective feeling that had driven everything he had done over the past year. Agnes Taylor was in prison, Kenneth Booth was in prison, Patricia Dyer was in prison, Clayton Delio was in prison. The network was gone, Emma was safe. Tony had won, not only through the legal system, though that had helped, but through everything he had done himself, every decision, every risk, every choice to push forward when it mattered most. He realized something clearly in that moment. Sometimes the best way to expose injustice is not just to record it, but to confront it, to act, to become more than a witness, to become someone who fights back. And he was okay with that. He gently closed Emma's door and walked down the hallway, thinking already about what might come next. Another case, another story, another chance to step in when things went wrong. He had spent years telling other people's stories. Now he was living his own. And it was not finished yet. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I would really like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It truly means a lot to us.